All right, I'm here with sports columnist Chad Leistikow from the Des Moines Register. We are going to break down the Big Ten title game between Michigan and Iowa, which will be played Saturday night at Lucas Oil Stadium. My name is Michael Cohen, and I'm a Michigan beat writer for the Detroit Free Press. How's it going, Chad? Have you gotten any sleep yet? I know I'm a little light on sleep this week.
Yeah, I thought I was going to have Saturday off for the most part with family. We were finally celebrating Thanksgiving, and in the back of my mind, I kind of knew that Minnesota might beat Wisconsin. But kind of assumed, everyone thought Wisconsin was going to win. So, but once Minnesota looked like it was going to maybe win that game, yeah, the week has been nuts ever since. And yeah, from your end, I suppose. There was probably a lot of, I guess, thoughts in the back of your mind that, okay, yeah, I'm not used to working past Ohio State Michigan game. So here we both are, kind of unexpectedly, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is my first season on the beat, but I was talking to everybody in the press box, and the consensus was that few people, if anybody, was giving, or excuse me, few people, if anybody, were giving Michigan a chance to beat Ohio State. And, it was one of those things where even the fans in the stadium, I think as the first quarter went along and the second quarter, even maybe into the third quarter, there was still kind of this wave of trepidation where they're like, okay, well, at some point this is going to turn around and it's going to fall apart, because that's just what happens to Michigan in this rivalry the last 20 years. But, as things started to get into the fourth quarter and the defense was just playing really well and the running backs were just gobbling up yardage by the dozen almost, it was one of those things where the stadium really came alive. And I'd heard from a lot of people that despite the size and the number of people that pack into Michigan Stadium, that it's not the loudest or most intimidating environment. But I can definitely say that of the games I covered this year, Saturday was significantly louder than anything else. And especially when I went back and watched the TV copy, it was really loud relative to some of the other games. I guess one of the things I wanted to ask you was, what is kind of the thought right now and the buzz in Iowa for a team that, started out so hot and got all the way to number 2, and then kind of had those back-to-back losses with the bye week in between, but then they sort of find a way to drum up this resolve and get things back together. I guess, I'm not sure if you were around with the 2015 team, which was obviously a great team as well, but do the Iowa fans think this team is good, or what do they think of this team?
Yeah, I think fans, want to believe. This was a team that has had a season unlike any other in the 23-year Kirk Ferentz era, in which we've seen as Iowa followers history repeat itself so often. But never has there been a season under Ferentz where the team started at such a high. I mean, they got to into the top 10 almost right away with the road win at Iowa State, who everyone thought was going to be a playoff contender. That was a massive win. And then they go into Maryland in what was seen as a toss-up game. I mean, Maryland was undefeated at the time and blew the doors off the Terps. And then the next week win a top 5 matchup against Penn State. So, yeah, Iowa gets to number 2 in the polls. They've never been that high in the Ferentz era at any point. And then that was their highest since '85 as a program. And so dealing with that, getting a Purdue team that just came in and pretty much hit its stride in the middle of the season, and then hitting a Wisconsin team that was at its peak. Michigan, of course, saw them maybe at the bottom.
Right.
So it was just kind of a 3-week stretch there where it was Purdue loss, bye week, Wisconsin loss, and negativity was everywhere for the Hawkeyes. And now, as you mentioned, Michael, they kind of rallied the troops. None of these last 4 wins in this 4-game winning streak has been necessarily pretty picturesque. They've overcome deficits in all these games except one, and pulled out, frankly, a miracle at Nebraska. A blocked punt in the fourth quarter. They were down 15 points and ended up scoring the last 22 in 15 and a half minutes. So they're stunned to be here, but now fans are excited for this chance because they haven't had this chance in 6 years.
One of the things that I was really curious about going into the Ohio State game was, of course, whether Michigan's pass rush would be able to generate pressure against theoretically an offensive line that has more talent than some of the offensive lines they've played this season. And for as complex and as diverse a football game can be, that Ohio State game, in my head leading up to it, it just felt like if Michigan could not get pressure there was no chance that they were going to win the game. And then when it became clear that they were going to generate pressure almost all the time, with Aiden Hutchinson having 15 pressures, it was pretty clear that they were not only going to have a good chance to win, but that they could win somewhat handily, and that's what they ended up doing. So I guess going into this game, it sounds kind of silly, but is it that simple again? Whereas if the tackles for Iowa can't hold up, and I know that they've had some injuries there. I know they've rotated 3 guys for 2 spots kind of throughout the season. And, Ferentz said that was a weak point coming into the season relative to the interior line. But I guess, from what you've seen from those tackles and what you've seen from the pass protection from running backs, how do you think they stack up against an elite edge rusher on either side?
Yeah, definitely. This is the biggest mismatch of the game, in my opinion. From Iowa's perspective, it's a huge concern. It's probably the concern, as you said, Michael. I mean, if they cannot block Hutchinson or the others, it's not just a one-man show, as Kirk Ferentz pointed out with this Michigan defense. It's going to be a lot of trouble. As you probably know, Iowa had a quarterback decision to make, and they're going to start Spencer Petras, who's definitely, I would say, statuesque in terms of his ability to escape pressure. So that's an issue for the Hawkeyes. And yeah, they do rotate 3 tackles, all of them very inexperienced. All of them have had rough games this season. George Karlaftis completely dominated Iowa for Purdue back in week 7. It was Iowa could not block Wisconsin. That said, again, we go back to this 4-game winning streak for the Hawkeyes. And really the crux of the streak has been improved offensive line play. Petras was not sacked in the second half after he came in off the bench at Nebraska. So we'll see. They think that this is the best their offensive line has been all year. Offensive line has always been kind of the hallmark of the Iowa program. It's just weird that it is the one weakness this year that has kind of held this team back, outside of its, All-American center, Tyler Linderbaum. So it's a fascinating thing to watch on Saturday. And Iowa players yesterday talked about there are ways we can, help stave that off a little bit, but there's no way to avoid it altogether. So they got to find another way around and try to win this game.
Another matchup that I think is really interesting is Cade McNamara, quarterback from Michigan, has been unbelievably careful with the ball this season. Only 3 interceptions, and even on throws that have gone incomplete, he's given the defensive backs very few opportunities to even make plays, versus a secondary, that leads the nation in interceptions, that is an absolute ball hawking unit. Now, I think Hankins is out, right? And Hankins
Correct.
is a player who had multiple interceptions for them at the corner spot. So that's obviously going to be a loss. But I guess, from the Michigan standpoint, this is a passing game that gets involved sparingly, that kind of lulls you to sleep with some of these short passes, and then maybe 2-3 times a game, McNamara will air it out. And usually they hit 1 or 2 of them. And that kind of is enough for their aerial passing game, downfield passing game, to provide significant ballast for the running game. I guess from your perspective, when you look at the Iowa secondary, how are they generating these interceptions? Is it really good man-to-man coverage? Is it great zone coverage, anticipating things? Is it guys catching tip balls? Or what have you seen that's made them so potent back there?
Yeah, they call themselves the Doughboys with a Z on the end. They're going for a school interceptions record. You mentioned it. They have 22. The school record is 23. That's something to watch here this weekend. But you're right, McNamara, unbelievably efficient with the ball. I think 3 interceptions for the season, right?
Yes.
Yeah. What they've done to get those interceptions, 2 things. Number one, Phil Parker, Michigan State alum, is Iowa's defensive coordinator, and is just an incredible coach. He's their best assistant coach, and that's not taking anything away from anyone else. But they've had 5 of the last 10 defensive backs of the year. They keep their eyes in the backfield. That's one thing. They're just so well schooled. They just stay in the position that they're supposed to be in their zone coverage, play pretty much all zone, and they keep their eyes in the backfield. So they watch the quarterback, they watch his eyes, and try to get breaks on balls. That's how they get some of those interceptions. They had 4 against Penn State. They had 4 against Iowa State. They had 6 against Maryland, 4 against or 3 against Iowa State, 4 against Indiana. So they've gotten them in bunches. And it's usually when the other team is in a must pass situation. And it does not seem to me that Michigan gets put in those situations very often. And honestly, I don't really expect that to be the case on Saturday. So Iowa, in my opinion, is going to need some tip balls. They've got great linebackers. That's probably the strength of the defense. Ken Jack Campbell, who's their best defensive player, he's 6'5". He's kind of like a Brian Urlacher type in the middle, where he's just disruptive in both the pass and run. Can he get his hand on a ball, get it tipped? Iowa make a big play. That's probably Iowa's best path to victory, is force some turnovers. But man, it just seems so challenging against what's a really diverse run game for Michigan. It's just really impressive what they've done on the run. And maybe I'll throw it back at you on this, is how Michigan, what stuck out to me on Michigan stats is just how few negative plays they have in the run game. And Iowa counts on that so much to get teams into third and long. And I don't know if Iowa can make that happen. They're very undersized in the D line.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And that's a significant credit, not only to the offensive line, but more so, I would say, to the ability of tailback Hassan Haskins to basically, I mean, you hear this all the time, but he literally does fall forward on every single play. And I mean, he's had games with 28, 30 carries, and none of them go for negative yardage. Now, he might get stopped for 0, or he might get stopped for 1 on occasion. But the fact that he never goes backward is paramount to keeping this offense on schedule, which for a quarterback like McNamara, who doesn't necessarily want to be throwing it 30, 40 times a game, the more they can stay on schedule, the better. And I have a couple of stats here about Haskins, since you brought that up. That's really interesting. He has 96 first downs this year, which is most in the country out of any running back. And against Ohio State, he had 16, if I remember correctly, by himself. And so this is a guy that just moves the chains. And their offensive line does a great job in the trenches as well. I guess one of the things that is sort of that I kind of like to think about each week is, on each side of the ball, is there sort of an X factor player, or a guy that, maybe has a good game every couple weeks, or maybe somebody that you think is about to break out that can influence this game. And let's start on offense. And so for Michigan, I would say on offense, it's got to be tight end Eric All. This was a player who started the year and was basically a non-factor in the passing game, but has always been a very good blocker. But as the season went on, and especially toward the second half of the season, he really became an important third down weapon for McNamara on a lot of these short underneath throws to move the chains, because he's pretty athletic to gain yards after the catch. He was pretty quiet against Ohio State, but he's got a game with 10 catches for 98 yards in the back half of this season. He had the game-winning touchdown against Penn State. So on offense, he's a guy that I think could be a weapon. But as you mentioned, linebacker is a strength for Iowa. So that's going to be a fascinating matchup to see how they defend him. When you look at the Hawkeyes offense, is there a player there that you think needs to have a big game for them to step forward?
Well, certainly their best chance to have a successful day offensively is with the running back, Tyler Goodson. So that's not really a surprise answer. But, you think back to the 2016 Iowa upset of Michigan in Kinnick, when Michigan was 9-0, ranked third in the country. Iowa was a 20-point underdog at least, and won that game thanks to Akram Wadley. He was a one-man show. They didn't do a ton offensively, but they did enough. So I would go Goodson. But the other guy I would point out that's a little less obvious is Keegan Johnson. He's a true freshman wide receiver. No catches the first 3 weeks of the season. They hardly used him at all. Iowa does not recruit at the level of Michigan, no question about that. But Keegan Johnson was the first 4-star wide receiver in the program, pure receiver, since I think 2009 that they got. And they've hit him on some big plays this year. He's made big plays and big moments. Against Penn State, had a massive fourth quarter catch and run to set up a huge turning point in the game, basically. And then against Minnesota, I don't know if you've seen that clip, but Iowa's leading 17-16 in the fourth quarter of a game they're getting outplayed in completely, frankly. And to throw a wide receiver screen that was dead to rights, 2 Minnesota guys wrap him up, but he breaks out of the tackle, squirts out, and runs up the sideline for a touchdown. This is a guy that can make plays, and he had a rough, I wouldn't say rough game, I guess, but a real spotlight game against Nebraska. He's from Omaha. I think he had a lot of jitters in that game potentially. So he only had one catch in the game. So he might come into this game a little bit under the radar, but I think he's number 6 for the Hawks. And he's got a chance to be a big time player in this league. Iowa doesn't get many of them at receiver. He seems like he's ready for a big moment, is what I'll say.
Gotcha. On the defensive side for Michigan, I'm going to go with their true freshman safety, Rod Moore. This is a guy who basically was added into the starting lineup within the last month, and replaced R.J. Moten, who was a guy who was playing a lot of free safety while Brad Hawkins played strong safety in the box. But Moore has played the majority of the snaps. And the reason why I think he's important is that when I was looking at Spencer Petras trying to get a feel for sort of what he's good at and what his weaknesses are, he's actually among the best quarterbacks in the country when it comes to producing big plays of 20 yards or more down the field. He's got around 400 yards and 4 touchdowns on passes that have traveled 25 or more yards in the air. And so the reason I'm identifying Moore is because if Iowa is going to try and get back into a game if they fall behind, or if they're going to try and catch Michigan, it's probably going to be with one of those big plays down the field that you mentioned. And I think Rod Moore's ability to cover downfield is going to be huge for them, especially if Iowa is able to run the ball and you have to start creeping your strong safety down toward the box to stop the run. That was one of the keys for Michigan against Ohio State, was that they were able to stop the run with 6. There were 4 defensive linemen and then 2 linebackers. So they basically were able to play 2 high safety the whole game. And that, didn't necessarily stop Stroud, because he still threw for 394 yards, but it stopped him from completing a single pass over 26 yards until the final few minutes of the game. So I would say Michigan's true freshman safety, Rod Moore, is huge on defense. How about you? Who's the spotlight player there?
That's a good one. Great analysis there. Yeah, I think you're right. Basically, on Iowa's offense, I think they're going to try, if they do pass, or when they do pass, it'll be short stuff for the most part, because I don't think they can camp out in the pocket much. And then, yeah, I agree. A couple deep shots, they're going to try it in this game. If you think back to the 15 title game, Iowa took one big deep shot in the fourth quarter and hit it, and almost won the game, if not for a 22-play Connor Cook-led drive. Anyway, on Iowa's defense, I'll go with Dane Belton. He was a first team All Big Ten safety, but he plays kind of their cash cornerback position. And I know Michigan runs a lot out of its 11 personnel, 3 wide personnel. And that means Dane Belton will kind of be almost like an outside linebacker, slot corner type of thing, where he's also asked to stop the run. So he just becomes such a pivotal guy in Phil Parker's scheme. And he's got 5 interceptions this year out of that spot. So he's been a playmaker. He's a first team All Big Ten guy. And those are the guys you're going to have to count on in a game with the athletes that Michigan has. I mean, Iowa, wins on grit, but Belton is one of those guys that has that athleticism and size to both be a pass coverage guy and stop the run. So number 4 for the Hawks.
Gotcha. And I will end on this. I kind of like to think about too, what is a potential Achilles heel for a team that has been a problem at times this season and may or may not pop up Saturday night. But for Michigan, it's got to be their red zone execution on offense. They were absolutely out of the park tremendous against Ohio State, but for much of the season, it's been a field goal fest inside the 20-yard line. And Jake Moody has not missed a field goal inside of 40 yards this season. And so if you look at their red zone numbers, their overall scoring percentage in the red zone is like at the very top of the country, 96% or something like that. But their touchdown percentage is way lower, to the point where it's really subpar. And offensive coordinator Josh Gaddis has come under fire for that a little bit this year, although he cleaned it up the last few games. So I would say for Iowa, that's got to be a huge area of focus, right? Because anytime that they can hold Michigan to a field goal in the red zone for a team that doesn't score a lot itself, that's going to be a huge victory for them. So the potential Achilles heel for Michigan would be struggles in the red zone on offense that has happened at times this year against a very talented Iowa defense.
No, that's a great point. You made me think of the Iowa-Minnesota game. I mean, Iowa was outgained by almost 150 yards by Minnesota that day. Again, another run-heavy team, but they held up in the red zone that game. They forced Minnesota to elect 3 short field goals, and that's why I was 17-16 in the fourth quarter instead of Iowa down 24-17 or whatever. So great point there. I'm just going to point overall as a whole to Iowa's defense. The defensive numbers, overall for the season have been really good. But if you look at Iowa's 6-0 start, they allowed 13 points per game in that start, and that included, like I said, the wins against Iowa State and Penn State, 2 really good teams, top 10 teams, and Maryland, which had a pretty high-powered offense at the time. But since then, Iowa's defensive scoring average is 21.5. They've gotten more banged up on defense. Like, as you mentioned, they lost Matt Hankins, who was a PFF darling at corner, and so that hurts. So Iowa's down to its 4th cornerback now, opposite Riley Moss, who's also down a PCL. He's playing with 1 PCL, the Big Ten Defensive Back of the Year. So that is a concern to me for the Hawkeyes, just that the defense, instead of allowing in that 14-17 range, I think it's going to be probably more in the, even if they have a good day, in a 24 range. Yeah. And I don't know if the offense can keep up. So just something to watch there, as 5 of the last 6 opponents have hit 20 plus, and this is probably the best offense Iowa's going to face all year. Definitely the most balanced offense they'll face all year.
Awesome. Well, Chad, this was a lot of fun previewing the game. We'll save our predictions for later in the week. Readers can check them out on our respective websites. But thanks again for the time. Looking forward to seeing you in Indy.
Yeah, you too, Michael. Thanks.